the Rhineland. March 14, 1945. The war in Europe is in its death throes, but the dying beast is thrashing violent and hard. Here, in the dense ancient forests of Western Germany, the morning light struggles to pierce the canopy. A heavy, clinging mist wraps around the trunks of pines and oaks, dampening the sound of boots on the forest floor, but doing nothing to stifle the bone-deep chill that gnaws at the men of the 92nd Infantry Division. The air tastes of wet rot, pine needles, and the acrid, metallic temps of distant artillery, the perfume of the Western Front. Among the shadows and the mud, the men of 2nd Squad are gearing up. They are the Buffalo Soldiers, men who have crossed an ocean to fight for a country that treats them as second-class citizens, fighting a two-front war against the Wehrmacht in front of them and the skepticism of their own commanders behind them. They are tired. Their uniforms are caked in the grime of a long winter campaign. Steam rises from their mouths in short, sharp bursts as they check their weapons. The clatter of bolts and the click of magazines, the only conversation. But one man is doing something different. Private First Class Samuel Hayes is crouched at the base of a moss-licked oak, isolated not by distance, but by focus. In his hands, he holds an M1 Garand, the standard-issue workhorse of the American infantry. But the weapon looks wrong. Fixed to the end of the barrel is a bulbous, ugly metal cylinder, wrapped in canvas and secured with blackened wire. It looks like a piece of plumbing scavenged from a bomb site, which, in truth, is exactly what it is. The men around him watch with a mixture of amusement and pity. They nudge each other, gesturing with their chins toward Hayes. To them, he's the quiet guy from Alabama who spends too much time scavenging through trash heaps. They think they are looking at a fool tinkering with junk. They have no idea they are looking at the future of warfare. Before we walk this path with Samuel Hayes and witness the moment that changed everything, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps keep these stories alive, to understand why a man would risk a court-martial to strap a homemade pipe to his rifle in the middle of a war zone. You have to understand where Samuel came from. You have to understand the fire that forged him long before he ever held a weapon. Samuel Hayes was born in the smoke and heat of Birmingham, Alabama, a city where the sky was often stained grey by the steel mills. He was the third son of Thomas Hayes, a man with hands like leather and a back bent by 30 years of pouring molten steel. From the time Samuel was 8 years old, he lived in two worlds. By day, during the sweltering Alabama summers, he was his father's shadow in the industrial district. He learned the language of metal. He learned that steel sings when you strike it, that heat changes the soul of a material, and that iron, for all its strength, can be made to bend if you understand its grain. He watched raw red-hot chaos be beaten into tools of precision, but his education didn't end when the sun went down. His mother, Martha, was a seamstress by trade, but by necessity she was a mechanic of the microscopic. To keep food on the table, she repaired watches and clockwork toys for the white families on the other side of town. At night, under the wavering light of a kerosene lamp, Samuel would watch her nimble fingers manipulate gears no larger than a grain of rice. She taught him that the smallest thing burr on a cog, a hairspring bent by a fraction of a millimeter, could bring a powerful machine to a halt. From his father, he learned force and heat. From his mother, he learned patience and tolerance. It was a dangerous time to be a brilliant young black man in the Deep South. Education was separate and fiercely unequal. Opportunities were gates locked with rusty chains. Samuel's older brother, Marcus, had managed to claw his way into the Tuskegee Institute for 2 years before the money ran out and the crushing weight of Jim Crow economics forced him back to labor. But Marcus brought home treasures, textbooks on physics, thermodynamics, and calculus. Samuel devoured them. He didn't just read them. He dismantled the concepts in his mind and rebuilt them, just as he did with the stray radios and broken engines he found in the neighborhood. His sister, Claire, would often wake up at 2 a.m. to find the shed out back glowing with candlelight. Inside, Samuel would be hunched over a workbench made of pallets, his face inches from a disassembled carburetor, lost in a world where the only laws that mattered were the laws of physics, laws that, unlike the laws of Alabama, did not care about the color of his skin. When the war broke out, Samuel didn't rush to enlist. He went north to Tennessee, finding work in a munitions factory. He wanted to use his hands. He was quickly moved from the heavy lifting to quality control because he had a supernatural ability to spot a defect. He could look at a tray of artillery fuses and point to the one that would fail, seeing imperfections that others needed a magnifying glass to find. But even there, the ceiling was low. He watched white workers with half his aptitude get promoted to foreman, while he was told to keep his head down and be grateful for the wage. The frustration built inside him like steam in a capped boiler. "If I'm going to be treated like I don't matter," he told his father one night, "I might as well do it somewhere I can fight back." His mother cried when he signed the papers. His father just nodded, his eyes hard and proud. He knew his son wasn't just going to war against the Germans. He was going to war against the world's perception of him. He landed in the 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, one of the only all-black combat divisions in the United States Army. But the officers, they were white, and many of them looked at the men under their command not as soldiers, but as a liability. At Fort Huachuca in Arizona, amidst the dust and the rattlesnakes, the prejudice was open and ugly. They were given cast-off equipment. Training schedules were shortened. The unspoken sentiment from the high command was clear. These men are for labor, not for combat. Don't expect much. Samuel Hayes took that expectation and quietly dismantled it. He didn't talk back. He didn't fight in the barracks. He observed. He watched the white instructors demonstrate weapons maintenance and noted where the manuals were wrong. He watched the tactics and saw the flaws. There's a story from training that the old-timers in the unit still tell. One evening, Private Robert Jackson Allowed, boisterous kid from Chicago who slept in the bunk next to Samuel, jammed his rifle so badly during a live-fire drill that the rangemaster screamed. He'd have to send it to the armorer to be drilled out. Samuel walked over, asked for the rifle, and sat down in the dirt. He didn't use a hammer. He used the tip of a bullet and a piece of wire. He dismantled the receiver, identified a burr on the guide rod that had caused the bolt to seize, filed it down against a rock, and reassembled the weapon. It took him 3 minutes. He handed it back to the rangemaster, who stared at him with his mouth open, unable to reconcile the genius he had just witnessed with the rank and race of the man standing before him. By July 1944, they were in Italy, the Arno River Valley. This wasn't training anymore. This was the meat grinder. The terrain was a nightmare of hills, rocky outcrops, and mud. The fighting was brutal, close quarters, and terrifying. And the casualties mounted. It was here, in the freezing mud of the Serchio River Valley in the winter of '44, that Samuel began to obsess over a specific problem. The Germans were masters of the ambush. They set up overlapping fields of fire, hidden perfectly in the terrain. To take them out, the Americans had to send out patrols to find them. But the moment a patrol fired a shot to engage a sentry, the sound ripped through the valley. Crack, and then hell would open up. Mortar, machine guns. Artillery all zeroed in on that single gunshot. Samuel realized the problem wasn't the enemy's eyes. It was their ears. The American soldier could move quietly. He could crawl through wet grass without snapping a twig, but he couldn't kill quietly. The standard tactic was to call in artillery to smash a position, but that just told the Germans you were coming hours in advance. What they needed was a ghost. They needed a way to punch a hole in the enemy line without ringing the doorbell. Silencer, S-sound suppressors. The British SOE had them. The OSS had them. But a line infantry unit in a segregated division. They might as well have asked for a spaceship. The supply chain didn't even acknowledge they were worth the good boots, let alone experimental stealth technology. So Samuel Hayes went to work. He became a scavenger of the battlefield. While other men looked for souvenirs, Lugers, or medals, Samuel looked for trash. He pulled steel tubing from the wreckage of a downed Luftwaffe fighter plane. He cut rubber gaskets from discarded jerry cans. He collected steel wool from cleaning kits and springs from broken truck suspensions. His pack became a mobile workshop, clanking softly with the weight of potential. His squadmates thought he was losing his mind. "Hey Sam," Jackson would jeer, watching him file down a piece of brass by the light of a cigarette. "You building a radio to call home?" Something like that, Samuel would murmur, never looking up. The first prototype blew off the end of his rifle during a test fire in a ravine, singing his eyebrows and nearly taking off a finger. The second one worked for one shot, but the heat expanded the metal so badly it welded itself to the barrel, forcing him to spend 6 hours with a file cutting it off. He learned about gas expansion the hard way. He learned that supersonic bullets create a sonic boom that you can't silence, only mask. He learned that capturing the explosion of a .36 round is like trying to catch a lightning bolt in a glass jar, but failure was just data. Every time the device exploded or failed, Samuel saw exactly why. He visualized the gas swirling inside the tube, imagining the turbulence. He began to design baffles, tunnel chambers meant to slow the gas down, to strip away its energy before it could hit the open air and create that telltale crack. By February 1945, as the division pushed into Germany towards the Rhineland, he had it. The final design was ugly. It was a housing made of aircraft aluminum alloy, fitted with baffles made of folded steel mesh he'd shaped with pliers. He used rubber washers cut from tire inner tubes to seal the chambers. The attachment collar was machined from a piece of brass pipe, threaded by hand with a file and a hardened steel screw, a task of agonizing patience that took him 3 weeks of sleepless nights. On March 13th, the day before the operation, Samuel finally approached his platoon commander, Lieutenant William Bradford. Bradford was a Virginia Military Institute graduate, a man who carried himself with the rigid, aristocratic air of the Old South. He viewed his assignment to the 92nd as a career purgatory when Samuel presented the device. Standing at attention in the command tent, Bradford looked at it as if Samuel had handed him a dead rat. "Private Hayes," Bradford sighed, turning the grease-stained cylinder over in his gloved hands. "Where, exactly, did you acquire a degree in ballistics engineering?" "I don't have a degree, sir," Samuel said, his voice steady. "My father was a metal worker. I worked munitions in Tennessee. Bradford scoffed, tracing a finger over a rough weld. This looks like high school shop class, private. You understand that modifying government property is a court-martial offense? Yes, sir. But I request permission to test-fire it. The design is sound. It will suppress the flash and the report by at least 70%. Other soldiers had gathered near the tent entrance, drawn by the tension. Sergeant James Morrison, a towering black NCO from Philadelphia who was the glue holding the platoon together, stepped closer. He looked at the device not with disdain, but with a narrow-eyed curiosity. "Does it actually work, Hayes?" Morrison asked. "I'd stake my life on it, Sergeant." "You're staking the platoon's life on it if it fails," Corporal David Wilson chimed in from the back. Wilson had worked on assembly lines in Detroit. "Sam, look at those tolerances. If a bullet catches a baffle, that thing becomes a grenade right next to your face." Bradford handed the device back, wiping his gloves on his trousers. "I appreciate the initiative, Private, truly, but we fight with authorized equipment. I am not going to explain to the colonel why one of my men blew his own head off with a homemade toy. Request denied. Stow that thing away, or I'll have you up on charges." Samuel took the suppressor back. His face was a mask of stone. "Yes, sir." But as he walked away, the weight of the device in his hand didn't feel like a failure. It felt like a secret. That night, the reality of the next day's mission settled over the camp like a shroud. The objective was a German bunker complex, controlling a critical crossroads in the forest, 8 kilometers deep in enemy territory. Intelligence reports were grim. The bunker was reinforced concrete, impervious to light mortar fire. It was surrounded by a perimeter of 6 sentry posts. Captain Henderson, the battalion operations officer, one of the few white officers who actually gave a damn, had been blunt. "We can't shell it, or we destroy the crossroads we need. We have to take it with infantry. But they have eyes everywhere. If the sentries spot us, they alert the bunker. The bunker buttons up, and their machine guns turn the approach into a killing field. We need to get close to use satchel charges. To get close, we need to take out the sentries, fast and quiet." The plan was for a coordinated strike. First squad would try to bayonet or knife the sentries simultaneously, but everyone knew the odds. If one German screamed, if one shot was fired, the element of surprise was gone. They were looking at a meat grinder. Samuel sat on his bedroll, polishing the threads of his suppressor. He replayed Bradford's dismissal in his head. High school shop class. It wasn't just an insult to him. It was an insult to his father, to his mother, to every hour he'd spent learning the physics of the world. He looked over at Jackson, who was nervously writing a letter home. "You gonna use it?" Jackson whispered, seeing the glint of aluminum. "If I have to," Samuel said. "Bradford will skin you alive. Bradford can skin me later. I'd rather be court-martialed and alive than authorized and dead." Now we are back in the forest. It is 11:55 a.m. on March 14th. The mist is thinning, but the tension is thick enough to choke on. The platoon is spread out in a skirmish line, crouching behind the massive trunks of the Rhineland forest. Ahead, through the grey gloom, they can see the first objective, a German sentry post, a pile of logs and sandbags about 75 yards away. 2 German soldiers are there. One is scanning the trees with binoculars. The other is leaning against the logs, eating something from a tin. They look relaxed, bored. They are the guardians of the alarm bell. The plan is for first squad to crawl forward and engage. but the ground between them is covered in dry brush. It's impossible to cross silently. Samuel can see the first squad leader, Staff Sergeant Walker, hesitating. Walker knows that as soon as he moves, he'll be spotted. And once he's spotted, the flare goes up, and the machine guns in the main bunker start singing. Samuel is positioned on the left flank of 2nd Squad. He looks at Sergeant Morrison, who is watching Walker with a grim expression. Morrison knows the plan is falling apart before it even starts. Samuel makes his choice. He doesn't ask for permission. He doesn't hesitate. He reaches into his pack and pulls out the canvas-wrapped cylinder. His fingers move with the memory of 1,000 practice runs. He threads the brass collar onto the muzzle of his M1 Garand. It screws on smoothly, perfect, tight fit. Left, right, lock. He twists the locking wire to secure it. The rifle is now heavy, the balance shifted forward, front heavy and awkward. It looks ridiculous, like a blunderbuss from a storybook. Jackson, 10 yards to his right, sees him. His eyes go wide. He starts to wave his hand, mouthing the word, "Don't." Samuel ignores him. He ignores the regulations. He ignores the threat of the stockade. He raises the rifle. He settles the stock against his shoulder. The cheek weld is familiar, comforting. He breathes in the cold, damp air. He finds the sentry with the binoculars in his sights. The iron sights are clear, sitting just above the bulk of the suppressor. Distance, 75 yards. Wind, negligible. The German soldier is adjusting his helmet, turning slightly. Samuel's world narrows down to a single point. The aperture of the rear sight, the blade of the front sight, the grey wool of the enemy's uniform. He thinks of the steel mill, the roar of the furnace. He thinks of his mother's watch gears, tick, tick, tick. He exhales a long, slow stream of white mist. His finger takes up the slack on the trigger. Squeeze. The sensation of the recoil is the same. The rifle kicks back into his shoulder. But the sound, ... The sound is wrong. There is no thunderclap. There is no sharp crack that echoes off the trees and sends birds fleeing for miles. Instead, there is a sound like a heavy book being slammed flat on a table. A dull, metallic thud hiss. Foot, the gas, trapped by the steel mesh baffles, swirls and expands inside the aluminum tube, robbing it of its sonic fury. The rubber washers seal the exit for a microsecond, containing the pressure. Downrange, 75 yards away, the German soldier with the binoculars jerks violently. It looks like he's been shoved by an invisible hand. He crumples backward over the log, his binoculars flying from his grip. There is no muzzle flash. No smoke cloud to mark Samuel's position. The second German sentry, the one eating, flinches. He looks at his fallen comrade, confused. He doesn't reach for his rifle immediately. He thinks the man has slipped, or maybe fainted. He hasn't heard a gunshot. He doesn't know he is under attack. That second of confusion is all Samuel needs. He cycles the action of the Garand. The bolt clatters, clack-clack sound that seems deafeningly loud to Samuel, but is lost in the ambient noise of the forest at this distance. He acquires the second target. The German is just starting to realize something is wrong. Just starting to see the blood. Fat, the second shot, is just as quiet as the first. The German soldier spins around, clutching his shoulder, and drops behind the logs. Silence returns to the forest. It is a heavy, impossible silence. 10 yards away, Jackson is staring at Samuel, his rifle hanging limp in his hands. His jaw is actually unhinged. He looks from Samuel to the empty sentry post and back again. Sergeant Morrison is frozen in mid. He heard the metallic clatter of the bolt, but he didn't hear the shots. He sees the Germans are gone, neutralized. What in God's name? Morrison whispers. Samuel lowers the rifle. Smoke curls lazily from the end of the aluminum tube knot. A cloud, just a wisp. The device is hot. He can feel the heat radiating through the canvas wrap, but it held. The welds held. The baffles held. He looks at Morrison. He doesn't smile. He just nods. Staff Sergeant Walker, leading first squad, is looking back at them, confused. He's waiting for the gunfire. He's waiting for the alarm. But there is nothing. The enemy's eyes have been gouged out, and the brain the bunker doesn't even know it yet. Captain Henderson comes crouching up the line, followed by Lieutenant Bradford. They saw the Germans drop. They didn't hear the shots. Report. Henderson hisses, sliding into the cover beside Morrison. Who engaged? I didn't give the order. Hayes did, sir, Morrison says, pointing a thumb at Samuel. Bradford's face goes crimson. He pushes past Morrison, storming up to Samuel, though he keeps his head low. Private Hayes. Bradford whispers furiously. I told you, sir, Captain Henderson interrupts, his voice sharp. He is looking at the sentry post through his binoculars. They're down. Both of them. And the main bunker hasn't flinched. No alarm. Henderson lowers the glasses and turns his gaze to the ugly taped-up pipe on the end of Samuel's rifle. He looks at Samuel, really looks at him for the first time. Did you do that, Private? Yes, sir, Samuel answers. With that thing, yes, sir. 2 rounds. No alarm. Bradford opens his mouth to speak, to cite regulations, to salvage his authority. Sir, this is a direct violation of shut up, Lieutenant, Henderson says quietly. He doesn't look away from Samuel. How hot is it? It's getting warm, sir, but I can fire another 20 or 30 rounds before the rubber seals degrade too much. Henderson nods slowly. The tactical map in his head is being rewritten in real time. The suicide mission just became something else. It became an opportunity. Hayes, Henderson says, a grim smile touching his lips. You just brought us a miracle. Get up here. We have 5 more sentry posts to clear. You're going to take point. Bradford, get your squad ready to move. We're going to walk right up to their front door. Samuel checks the suppressor again. He tightens the locking wire. He can feel the eyes of the platoon on him. The mockery is gone. In its place is a sudden, fierce respect. He isn't the guy playing with trash anymore. He is the guy holding the skeleton key to the German line. Ready, sir, Samuel says. And so, the ghost of the Rhineland steps out from the tree line. The operation has changed. The timeline has changed. And for Samuel Hayes, the world has changed. But the hardest work is yet to come. The sentries were just the perimeter. The bunker a concrete beast, filled with men who want them dead is, waiting up the hill. And silence can only carry them so far. The mist seemed to thicken as they moved deeper into the wood, as if the forest itself was conspiring to aid this impossible mission. Samuel Hayes moved with a strange, fluid grace, the heavy, unbalanced rifle held ready across his chest. He was no longer just a rifleman. He was a precision instrument, and the squad moved around him like antibodies protecting a vital organ. Sergeant Morrison signaled for a halt. Through the tangled undergrowth, The second sentry post was visible, a crude foxhole dug into the roots of a massive beech tree. This time, the Germans were more alert. One was standing, weapon shouldered, pacing a tight perimeter. The other was crouched over a field telephone. If that man touched the dial, the element of surprise would vanish in a storm of mortar fire. Samuel didn't wait for orders. He had found his rhythm, a cold, mechanical cadence that bypassed fear. He braced the rifle against the trunk of a sapling. The suppressor was hot now, the heat shimmering off the canvas wrap, smelling faintly of scorched rubber where the inner tube washers were beginning to cook. He compensated for the heat mirage, aiming a fraction of an inch low dot fat. The pacing sentry dropped mid-stride, his legs simply folding beneath him. The sound was swallowed instantly by the wet trees. The man on the phone froze, his hand hovering over the receiver, his eyes wide as he stared at his partner's sudden collapse. He opened his mouth to shout, his lungs filling with air for a warning that would never come. Fat, the second round, took him in the chest. He slumped over the telephone, his body dead weight on the line, but he hadn't made the call. Samuel exhaled, cycling the bolt. Clack, clack. The sound was the only punctuation to the violence. Morrison looked at Samuel, his eyes wide in the gloom, and gave a sharp nod. Move up. They cleared the third post, then the fourth. It became a grim routine. Samuel would find the angle, account for the drop, and let the physics of his invention do the work. By the time they reached the fifth post, the suppressor was smoking visibly. The rubber seals were degrading, the baffles coated in carbon. The sound of the shots was getting louder, no longer a whisper, but a sharp cough. But it was still quiet enough. The wind in the trees masked the noise, and the main garrison, now only 400 yards away, remained blissfully, lethargically unaware. By 1300 hours, the perimeter was gone. 6 posts. 12 men. Not a single alarm raised. The path to the bunker was open. Captain Henderson brought the assault force to the edge of the tree line. Ahead, across 100 yards of scarred, muddy open ground, lay the bunker. It was a malevolent thing, a slab of grey concrete jutting out of the hillside like a skull. The black slits of the firing ports stared blindly at the forest. This was the kill zone. Under normal circumstances, crossing this ground would mean running into a wall of MG4 to fire that would cut a man in half. Hayes, Henderson whispered, his voice tight. We need to cross. I need you to keep their heads down. Can you suppress those firing slits? Samuel examined the weapon. The canvas wrap was charred black. The aluminum housing was dangerously hot, the metal expanding, threatening to lose its seal. The device is degrading, sir, Samuel said, his voice raspy. I've got maybe 10 reliable shots before the baffles warp completely. The accuracy is going to start drifting. I don't need surgical precision, Sergeant, Henderson said, unconsciously promoting him in the heat of the moment. I just need them too scared to look out the window. Give us 30 seconds. Yes, sir. Samuel found a prone position behind a fallen log. He arranged his ammunition clips on the rotting wood. He wasn't shooting at men now. He was shooting at dark, narrow slots in a concrete wall, targets no wider than a hand. Go. Henderson signaled. The assault team, led by Morrison, broke cover. They didn't scream. They didn't fire. They sprinted, boots churning the mud, racing against death. Samuel opened fire. Foot, foot, foot. He fired in a steady rhythm. The bullets sparked off the concrete edges of the firing slits, or zipped through into the darkness of the bunker. Inside that concrete box, it must have been a nightmare. Bullets were smashing into the interior, ricocheting wildly. But there was no muzzle flash outside, no thunder of a firing squad. The German gunners instinctively recoiled, pulling their faces away from the slits. They couldn't target what they couldn't see or hear. They hesitated, and in war, hesitation is death. Those few seconds of confusion were all Morrison needed. The assault team crossed the dead zone in a blur of olive drab. They slammed into the blind spots against the bunker walls. Beneath the traverse of the guns, Samuel fired his last round. The suppressor finally gave up the ghost. With a screech of tearing metal, the end cap blew off, sending the internal baffles spilling into the dirt. The rifle smoked, the barrel radiating heat like a furnace. But it didn't matter. Fire in the hole. Morrison screamed. He swung a satchel charge into the bunker's entryway. The team scrambled back, diving into the mud. Boom! The explosion shook the ground. A dull, heavy concussive wave that rattled Samuel's teeth. Smoke poured from the firing slits. A moment later, the heavy steel door groaned and swung inward, hanging off one hinge. Go. 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 The Americans poured into the breach, Thompson's submachine guns chattering. But the fight was already over. The concussion had stunned the occupants. The psychological terror of the silent approach had broken their will. Within minutes, German soldiers were stumbling out, hands clasped behind their heads, coughing in the smoke, looking bewildered. They kept looking at the trees, waiting for the battalion that must have surrounded them. They saw only a single platoon and a black soldier holding a broken, smoking metal tube. The aftermath was a scene of stunned disbelief. 23 prisoners. The crossroads secured, and on the American side, 0 casualties. Not one. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of what Samuel had accomplished began to settle over the men. Soldiers who had mocked him the day before now walked past him with reverence, some reaching out to touch his shoulder as if he were a talisman. Jackson just sat beside him on a crate of captured German rations, shaking his head. "I thought you were crazy, Sam. I swear to God, I thought you were crazy." "Maybe I am," Samuel said quietly, stripping the ruined remains of the suppressor from his barrel. But it worked. Then came Lieutenant Bradford. The officer looked shaken, his world-view visibly fractured. He walked up to Samuel, ignoring the activity around them. He looked at the pile of twisted aluminum and steel mesh on the ground, the high school shop project that had just saved his platoon from a massacre. "Private Hayes," Bradford said. His voice was different. The haughty, aristocratic edge was gone, replaced by something humbler. I misjudged this, and I misjudged you." Samuel stood up, wiping soot from his face. "You judged the book by the cover, sir. It's a common mistake." Bradford flinched, the truth of the statement hitting home. "I'm putting you in for a commendation, Hayes, and I'm going to make sure the colonel knows exactly whose idea this was. You have my word." "Thank you, sir." But it was Captain Henderson who changed Samuel's trajectory. He approached with a captured German map case under his arm. "Forget the commendation, Bradford. I'm taking him to division. This isn't just a soldier. This is an asset. Hayes, pack your gear. You're done carrying a rifle for a living. We have bigger problems for you to solve." 3 days later, Samuel stood in the commandeered farmhouse that served as division headquarters. The room smelled of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Colonel Raymond Hughes, the division commander, sat behind a massive oak desk. Beside him sat Brigadier General Albert Morrison, no relation to the sergeant, a man with stars on his collar and a reputation for ruthlessness. They listened in silence as Henderson briefed them. They passed the technical drawings. Samuel had made sketches of baffles, gas expansion chambers, and thread pitches between them. "You built this in a foxhole?" General Morrison asked, looking over his spectacles at Samuel. "In a dugout, sir, with a hand file and a hacksaw. And you have no engineering degree, no formal training?" "My father taught me metal, sir. The rest I read in books." Morrison leaned back, a rare smile touching his lips. "It seems, Colonel Hughes, that we have been wasting a significant resource. We have entire departments in Washington trying to solve the problem of muzzle flash and noise. And a private in the Rhineland just solved it with scrap metal." Hughes nodded. "Hayes, we're creating a special technical detachment. You're going to run it. You'll be attached to HQ. Your job is to take the problems the men are facing in the field and fix them. Build more fix the radios. Modify the Jeep intakes. Whatever it takes. And Hayes," Morrison added, "you can't do that as a private." "Congratulations, Sergeant." The promotion was dizzying. In an army where black soldiers were often denied stripe for years regardless of merit, Samuel had jumped ranks in a heartbeat. But as he walked out of that office, wearing fresh stripes that Henderson had personally pinned on, he felt the weight of it. He wasn't just a sergeant now. He was a proof of concept. For the next 6 weeks, Samuel ran a workshop out of a bombed-out garage. He gathered a team, the mechanic from Detroit, the welder from Chicagomen whose skills had been ignored just like his. They became a factory of innovation. They standardized the suppressor design, creating a version that was durable and real. They built 30 of them. The effect on the battlefield was immediate and psychological. American patrols began to strike with ghostly silence. German morale, already teetering, began to crack. Prisoners spoke of the black ghosts who could kill without sound. The rumor terrified them more than the artillery. It wasn't the weapon itself. It was the unknown. In May 1945, just days before the German surrender, the division formed up on a parade ground in northern Italy. The air was warm, smelling of spring and victory. General Morrison stood on a wooden dais. He called Samuel Hayes forward. The Bronze Star was pinned to Samuel's chest. The citation read for meritorious achievement in ground operations against the enemy. But Morrison's speech went off script. "Sergeant Hayes represents the very best of this army." Morrison's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. He saw a problem, and he solved it. He refused to let the limitations placed upon him by others define his contribution. Let this be a lesson to every officer and enlisted man. Capability has no color. Genius has no rank. The men cheered. It was a moment of transcendent hope. For a few minutes, standing there in the Italian sun, it felt like the world had truly changed. But wars end, and the soldiers go home. Samuel returned to Birmingham in 1946. He stepped off the train with a Bronze Star in his pocket and the technical knowledge of a master engineer in his head. He walked past the whites-only sign in the train station waiting room. He took his seat at the back of the bus. The uniform didn't matter anymore. The inventions didn't matter. To the society he returned to, he was just another black man in the Jim Crow South. The dissonance was agonizing. He had commanded the respect of generals, but he couldn't buy a sandwich at the lunch counter. He didn't stay. He couldn't. He moved to California, part of the Great Migration, chasing the promise of the West. The aerospace industry was booming, hungry for men who understood metal and pressure. He walked into an interview at a major aircraft manufacturer. The hiring manager looked at his resume, then at his face, and hesitated. "It says here you designed hydraulic systems for the army," the manager said skeptically. "I did," Samuel replied, "and I can show you how to improve the seal integrity on your landing gear struts. You're using the wrong alloy for the pressure variance." He got the job. He spent the next 30 years in a quiet, determined battle of his own. He rose through the ranks, not as fast as the white engineers, but steadily. He patented 6 designs for hydraulic valves. He worked on the components that would eventually go into the Apollo program. He bought a house. He raised a family. He told his children that the mind was the one weapon no one could take away from them. But the story of the Rhineland remained a whisper, a memory kept in a box with a tarnished medal. Decades passed. The world turned. The civil rights movement burned through the country, tearing down the signs that had greeted Samuel at the train station. History began to look back, searching for the stories that had been buried. In 1991, an invitation arrived. The Virginia Military Institute, the bastion of tradition, the alma mater of Lieutenant Bradford, wanted him to speak. Samuel was an old man now. His hair was white, his movements slower, but his eyes were as sharp as they had been in the forest. He stood at the podium in a grand hall, looking out at hundreds of young cadets, black, white, Asian, Hispanics sitting side by side. He told them about the mud. He told them about the fear. And he told them about the suppressor. That device, Samuel said, his voice echoing in the silence, wasn't complex. It was just physics. The hard part wasn't bending the steel. The hard part was getting permission to use it. The hard part was proving that a man who looked like me could teach the army something about warfare. He paused, gripping the podium. "I see you all here, sitting together. That is the victory. Not the bunker we took in 1945. The victory is that when one of you has an idea, the rest of you will listen to it because it's a good idea, not because of who said it. Do not let prejudice blind you to the solutions standing right next to you. You cannot afford to leave talent on the table." The ovation was thunderous. Somewhere in the back of the room, the ghost of Lieutenant Bradford might have been nodding. Samuel Hayes died in 2003, quietly in his sleep. His obituary in the New York Times took up half a page. It called him a war hero and pioneer of engineering. But the true legacy wasn't in the newspaper. It was in the 92nd Infantry Division Association, which established the Samuel Hayes Innovation Award. The first recipient was a young woman, a sergeant named Davis, serving in Iraq. She had rigged a cooling system for her unit's radios, using computer fans and duct tape, keeping communications open during a critical firefight. When she accepted the award, she held up the medal, etched with Samuel's profile. "I never met Sergeant Hayes," she said, "but I know him. He's the reason I knew that if I had a solution, I had a duty to build it." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history.